If you came here tonight for my State of the Union analysis, here it is in 85 words or less, starting now. Didn't watch, don't care. The State of the Union is one of the most pointless obligatory exercises we engage in as a nation. If I haven't watched the Super Bowl in 7 years, why would I want to watch Geritol Joe Biden gargle his dentures for an hour and a half? The Constitution requires the president to deliver a yearly message to the Congress. Jefferson used to send his in the mail. Jefferson, as was so often the case, had the right idea. The end. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where love means never having to say you're having trouble walking, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Or should I say brother and sister America and all ships on the Great Salt Lake? Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant, but I am not your priesthood holder. I'm going to review Under the Banner of Heaven tonight, which is a Hulu series, 7 episodes in length, based very loosely on Jon Krakauer's book of the same name, which came out back in 2003 and is, in my view, one of the best narrative history books of this century. I cringe whenever I hear someone calling it a true crime book because it's just too good for that label, frankly, even though I guess in the literal sense of the term it is about a true crime, but I digress. The book and the show are about the 1984 double murder of Brenda Lafferty, age 24, and her 15-month-old daughter, Erica, which took place in the Salt Lake suburbs in the fall of 1984. The killers were Brenda's 2 brother-in-laws, and the act was motivated by their belief that one of them, the eldest brother, Ron Lafferty, was God's chosen prophet on earth, sent by the Almighty to cleanse the church of apostates and heretics and return the faith to being in its pristine form as it was in the days of Joseph Smith. And when I say the book is one of the best books I've ever read in any genre on any subject, I say it with the proviso that I still wish I had never read it, because there is stuff in that book that sticks with you, always, and you can't get rid of it. I refer specifically to Dan Lafferty's very detailed, very graphic, very matter-of-fact description of how he exsanguinated his little baby niece in her crib with a straight razor. I don't want to have ever read that. If I could go back to a world where I hadn't read that, I would, and that's probably why I don't ever read true crime books or watch the true crime documentary shows that everybody else seems to like so well. But needless to say, I was already well aware of the book and a great fan of Jon Krakauer before they ever made the series, so I'm kind of amazed that this thing came out all the way last May and totally escaped my attention until this past weekend. It wound up being Lady Curmudgeon who told me about it, which makes this a good spot to pause and say that doing this review is a bit of a personal minefield for me, since I've been a member of an LDS family for going on 35 years, and I know some of those family members are watching right now, and let's just get it out there. I know some of my wife's relations probably will not be thrilled with this video, and you've never heard me issue a disclaimer on anything before, and even if it totally ruins your idealized image of me, I am going to issue a brief one right here. None of what follows is intended as any sort of insult or affront to the Mormon faith or the LDS Church or any of its members. If you ask me to make a list of the 100 best people I have ever known, at least 70 of them would be Latter-day Saints. I think the social values the church preaches are good and proper values. If you put 2 men in front of me who are equal in every respect, but one's a Mormon and the other one isn't, and I have to choose one of them to look after my wife and kids for the weekend, I am picking the Mormon without hesitation. But I also can approach this review from a perspective that perhaps not many other people can, as one who is neither a member nor an ex-member of the church, but a member of an LDS family nonetheless for over 2/3 of my life. So when I started watching episode 1 of this show, I knew within moments that it was written by a disaffected ex-Mormon who, though he tries to hide it and treat things objectively and sometimes succeeds, he still has a fairly evident axe to grind with the church, and that is the first big divergence that the series takes from the book. Jon Krakauer is not a Mormon. He's the son of a Jewish dad and a Unitarian mom, didn't know anything about Utah except that it had some good ski slopes. So when he wrote the book, he wrote it from the perspective of a total outsider, for whom everything about Mormonism is slightly weird and or goofy and or exotic. The series has a completely different sort of tonal center. It drops us directly into Salt Lake Mormon world and expects us to pick things up as we go along. And it uses the two main detective characters to do that job, both of whom are fictional. Detective Jebediah Pyrie, squeaky clean LDS husband and father and seminary teacher, played by Andrew Garfield, and Detective Bill Taba, hard-boiled, half-Paiute Indian grizzled veteran cop, new to the area, still getting acclimated to the whole Mormon thing, played by Gil Birmingham. Also, if I'm being honest, I think they probably invented an Indian character just so they would have an excuse to say the word Lamanite a whole bunch of times. Maybe that's just me. And you get very early on what the narrative function of these two characters is supposed to be. The Jeb Pyrie character is a stand-in for the screenwriter, the guy who starts out the story as an unerring true believer but has his faith shaken and ultimately undermined by the events that take place in the story and the things that he finds out about the early history of the church that he didn't previously know. Meanwhile, the Bill Taba character is a stand-in for the audience member who doesn't know anything about Mormons or Mormonism, so he often serves as a vehicle for delivering expositional content. The guy who is allowed to ask all the questions that an audience member is probably thinking who doesn't know Moroni from Maury Povich. The questions like, why do you guys call each other brother all the time? And how come you don't drink Coca-Cola? And so on. And this is another fairly huge divergence from the book, because the book concerns itself only with the real people and the actual events, while the series is building a largely fictional narrative around the kernel of the real-life double murder and some of the real-life people involved. But when you get into the second-tier characters, there are a lot of composites and name changes and what have you. And I think this is a pretty good example of the difference between based on and inspired by. In the credits for this show, it says it is inspired by the Krakauer book. If they had said based on, that would have been kind of a joke, because it totally isn't. In fact, the only thing that the book and the movie have in common from where this viewer is sitting is that Krakauer used the parallel narratives of the 1984 murder investigation and the early history of the Mormon Church and sort of wove them into the same quilt over the course of the proceedings. The series also does that, though not quite as effectively, and I honestly think that's where the similarities end as far as the source material is concerned. And I want to do a brief sidebar here on Andrew Garfield. He's had kind of a fascinating career since he got fired from being Spider-Man. And do you guys remember how that whole thing went down? They do the two Amazing Spider-Man movies in 2012 and 14. Neither one is all that great, but they both make money, so there's every intention on Sony's part to make a third installment and round out the trilogy. Garfield is on a 3-picture deal. He's already locked in, so easy peasy, right? Except Sony, they can't leave well enough alone. They decide, you know what would be great? If we got China to help out with the budget on this third picture. China loves Hollywood. It'll be great. So there's some big entertainment industry shindig down in Brazil that year, which I think was being done in conjunction with the World Cup. And the Sony execs decide, you know what would really seal the deal with our potential Chinese partners? If we flew in Spider-Man himself, dressed him up in the suit, and we can have him do a little dog and pony show for him. Or a spider and pony show, as the case may be. Maybe even a dog and spider show. Who the hell knows? It's going to be incredible, you guys. With Spider-Man in the room, in the flesh, those Chinese bastards, they're going to be writing us so many checks we will have to buy them new pens. Meanwhile, back in England, Andrew Garfield's just minding his own business, doing whatever it is actors do when they're not acting, when he gets an urgent call from the top brass over at Sony, telling him he needs to get his scrawny, spidery ass down to Brazil pronto. We got some Chinese whales that we're trying to reel in. We think dressing you up in that spandex suit and having you do a little song and dance for these folks could be the thing that really seals the deal. Anyway, your flight leaves Heathrow in 45 minutes. See you when you get here, buddy. And Garfield says, okay, I guess. I mean, I'm under contract to you guys, so I'm not really in much of a position to say no here, even though this all sounds pretty insulting and degrading, but hey, whatever. So he jumps on the plane, takes the 12-hour flight to Rio, gets checked into his hotel, and promptly passes out unconscious because that's what people do who have just taken a 12-hour international flight. 2 hours later, phone rings. Andrew, buddy, where the hell are you? We got these Chinese investors all sitting here lined up in a row. We're just waiting for Spider-Man. Pal, how quick can you get down here? And Andrew Garfield, in that moment, to his eternal credit, he has himself an epiphany. He says, you know what? I think I don't need this Spider-Man shit. I just got off a 6,000-mile flight, and I'm damn well going back to sleep now. If you don't like it, go find yourself a new wall crawler. So they did. They fired his ass with extreme prejudice and immediate effect, and it had far-reaching effects on what came later. Sony decided to scrap The Amazing Spider-Man 3 altogether instead of recasting the lead role, and then they quickly pivoted to negotiating a licensing deal with Marvel Studios whereby Spider-Man would appear in Captain America Civil War, played by Tom Holland. So if Andrew Garfield doesn't stay in bed, if he decides to go downstairs and schmooze with the Chinese investors like they want him to, there's never any Spider-Man in the MCU. So how's that for a butterfly effect, huh? But it's hard not to admire Andrew Garfield for doing what he did. I think he found himself at a professional crossroads in that moment where he had to ask himself, do I want to be a movie star or do I want to be an actor? And he chose being an actor over being a movie star, which I think is strongly reflected in some of the roles he's taken on in the last 8 or 9 years since he got thrown off the Spider-Man gig. I'm also fascinated by the fact that he seems to gravitate toward playing characters who are devoutly religious men. The very next thing he did after the Spider-Man fiasco was Hacksaw Ridge, in which he played Desmond Doss, the only conscientious objector ever to win the Medal of Honor. And his performance in that one was so good, Joe Biden now weaves scenes from that movie into his personal anecdotes, as he often does when he sees a movie he likes. You guys remember this. It was only a couple months ago, I think, when Joe Biden was doing the thing his handlers try to avoid having him do at all costs, which is interacting with other human beings and saying words that aren't written on a teleprompter. Because each time that situation arises, we wind up with a brand new personal anecdote that sounds suspiciously like a scene from a movie that Joe saw recently and really enjoyed. So he's talking to some reporters, and all of a sudden he starts telling this story about how I was over in Afghanistan and I was given a silver star to a combat medic who, this guy had to rappel down a 500-foot cliff face with his wounded buddy on his back. So then the reporters call up the Pentagon, and the Pentagon says, come on, guys, what do you want me to do here? No, Joe Biden never gave any award to any medic who ever did anything remotely fitting that description. I think we both know that's a scene from Hacksaw Ridge, but please don't quote me on that. And here again, in Under the Banner of Heaven, we have Garfield, who describes himself as an irreligious man, playing a character of deep and abiding religious faith, and doing it in a perfectly believable way. And just like in Hacksaw Ridge, his character uses his faith as a source of courage and resolve to help himself get through terrifying situations where he nevertheless has a job that he needs to do. And those are the times when religious faith is an unambiguously good and useful thing. If your faith provides you with extra reserves of strength and moral clarity when you need them the most, what does it matter if your God is literally real or your scriptures are literally true? In a deterministic sense, it doesn't. And look, if it's your views on the afterlife that motivate you to be a good and upstanding person in this life, then I don't care all that much what those views are or where they come from or why you think them. I am in favor of anything that breeds civility, altruism, and social responsibility, and I have never encountered any earthly institution that does that better than the LDS Church. So the thing that bothers me most about this series is that I don't think enough time was spent on establishing and reinforcing the fact that by and large, Latter-day Saints are the finest people you will ever encounter on this planet. We see that Detective Pyrie has a happy, perfect Mormon family, at least to start out with. We get a couple little scenes with Brenda Lafferty's parents. We get a scene where the Relief Society ladies come in and save the kid's birthday party after being called by the husband, of all people. And that's a fairly serious breach of protocol in Mormon world, believe you me. But for the most part, we get male Mormon characters who are crazy, violent psychopaths, obsessed with religious eschatology, which these guys most assuredly were, make no mistake, but I felt like more effort could have gone into emphasizing that fundamentalist Mormons, people who traffic in such ideas, who fantasize about having half a dozen wives in floor-length flannel dresses who churn butter all day, they are vanishingly small in number, and their views are utterly repudiated by the rank-and-file membership of the mainline LDS Church. But far beyond the correctness or errancy of any church or religion or doctrine, what lesson should we take from the book and the series and the events that inspired them? Well, I think that question has a fairly simple answer. In any large group of people, there is going to exist the entire continuum of good and evil. If any body of religious doctrine can be co-opted to serve evil, even when far more often, for far more people, that same body of doctrine serves as something uplifting and edifying and praiseworthy, then it can be bad as often as it can be good. Just as I know a lot of current Mormons, I also know a lot of ex-Mormons, a lot of lapsed Mormons, or whatever term you prefer. And I think their views of the church tend to align with those of Dustin Lance Black, who is the screenwriter and the showrunner on this series, who obviously, though he feels a lot of wistful nostalgia for the childhood days when he was a true believer, he also feels terribly betrayed that he had to find out for himself about some of the more unsavory aspects of church history that were largely suppressed for many decades, right up until everybody had the internet. And then, after that, the cat was pretty much out of the bag. Do I think there is something unique to Mormonism or Mormon fundamentalism that made this certain group of brothers from this certain family into cold-blooded killers of women and children? No, I don't. What I do think is that evil men often have a great facility for justifying their evil deeds in their own evil minds, and they will find those justifications, make no mistake. If it's not in a book of religious scripture, it will just be somewhere else. When they come up with a religion that is truly immune from being bastardized by evil men for their own malevolent designs, who knows, maybe that's the church I will join. Final item, I want to shout out the performances of Sam Worthington and Wyatt Russell as Ron and Dan Lafferty, respectively. And especially Russell, Kurt and Goldie's little boy, whom you may remember from his portrayal of the new discount Captain America in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This young man has a great talent for playing characters who are trying to keep it together, but still just always teetering on the knife edge of madness. And I also never saw a guy who was such a perfect 50-50 blend of his mommy and his daddy. If you told a computer to predict what the son of Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn should look like, it would spit out a picture of this dude. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Friday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.